if you want to be like a cat man, CRISPR that up.
Yeah.
Like more power to you. That's your choice. My only point is I think that people are trying to push a level of flexibility and openness on the typical American, typical human, where it's like, no, most of us are pretty much template people.
Right.
Like there's a template, we age, we marry, we have children. It's like the Indian system. It's like you're a young man, you're a householder, and then you retire and you go into the forest to contemplate, stuff like that.
All right, everybody, what's going on? This is the Other Life Podcast. I'm Justin Murphy. I have an excellent episode for you this week. This week's episode is with Razib Khan. Razib is a Bangladeshi American geneticist and writer. He's also a friend of mine. He's probably the smartest guy I know when it comes to genetics, by far probably. And he's also just chill and funny to hang out with and talk with. So you're really going to like this one. He actually writes the #1 Substack in the science category. So he's a really thoughtful guy, and he's also quite a successful independent intellectual. He's been blogging since the early 2000s, and now he's killing it on Substack. So we have a fascinating, wide-ranging discussion, mostly about genetics and politics, and then we also talk a little bit about the landscape for independent intellectuals, as you know, a common theme on this podcast. So this was awesome. Yeah, we talk about whether or not, Genghis Khan was good, actually. We talk about CRISPR gene editing technology and whether or not we're going to be able to jack up our intelligence and our testosterone and things like this, and when you're going to be able to do that, what that's going to look like. We talk about the caste system in America. We talk about genetically engineered bioweapons and so much more. So I hope you enjoy it. If you do enjoy this podcast, please check out Razib's Substack. Like I said, he's crushing it on Substack. His Substack is called Razib Khan's Unsupervised Learning, and you can find that at razib.substack.com. If you subscribe, tell him that I sent you. All right, that's all for now by way of introduction. Let's get on to the show. Oh yeah, I almost forgot. This episode is sponsored by IndieThinkers.org. Indie Thinkers is a private membership community dedicated to independent intellectuals working outside of institutions and on the internet instead. So if that describes you, you should check it out. It's just IndieThinkers.org, and there's a link in the show notes. You can request an invitation. All right, Razib, thanks for joining me today.
What's up?
I have an action-packed agenda for us today. We're going to be talking about everything from gene editing, CRISPR.
Yeah.
Sounds like a kitchen appliance, but it's not. Maybe one day it soon will be.
Yeah.
We're going to talk about the steppe. We're going to talk about...
Okay.
We're going to talk about...
2-step, 3-step, 4-step?
Genetic bioweapons. We're going to talk about American demography and genetics. I'm going to ask you some questions you might not be expecting.
All right.
Some challenging questions.
Yeah. Well, I mean, let me tell the people out there, you did not give me the questions ahead of time, which some people do and some people don't. So
I did not, because I know you're smart enough to handle them, and okay. I know it'd be more fun and more interesting to put you on the spot a little bit.
That's fair.
All right. So you wrote in a recent newsletter on your Substack that everything human makes more sense if you understand the steppe. So I thought we'd start with the steppe. For my listeners who probably know a little bit about the steppe, they probably know about Genghis Khan. They know the basic contours of that story. Yeah. What is the most interesting or important aspect of the steppe that people need to know today that they don't currently know?
Yeah, there's a lot of interesting aspects. I think at the high level, in the generality, I think the important thing that you need to know about the steppe is it's not just a destructive or reactive force. It was actually a creative force. So if you think about it from a Marxist perspective, there was a dialectic between the steppe and the settled, and this created a synthesis. And we are the product of the synthesis. But we tend to not think of it that way because the people on the steppe are an oral culture, and we are a written culture. And guess who gets to write the histories? The people who are the written culture. And so we know the Roman historians, we know what they thought of the Huns, but we don't know what the Huns thought of the Romans. We know, obviously, what, the Chinese and the Muslims thought of the Mongols. We don't know as much what the Mongols thought of them, although we know some. We know some of the Mongols' perspective. They're close enough, and they adopted literacy, and so we're starting to see in this late period, 1200 AD and later of the steppe, kind of at the end of the steppe period, what they thought and how they viewed the world. And it kind of gives us a sense, I think, of the Huns, the Scythians, all these other groups that are kind of considered fearsome and barbaric, which they were, but we never actually hear their voice. They're caricatures, and there are people who are, the descendants of the steppe well before history. So the Indo-Europeans, both of us are of, quote, Indo-European heritage. I did a back of the envelope, and I estimate about 850 million human beings alive today would be Yamnaya if you just do the weighting of the genomic fractions. So this is a steppe population probably numbered on the order of 100,000 generously. 5,000 years ago, the ancestor of probably the Indo-European languages today, and, contributes around like 50% of the ancestry in Northern Europe, 30% in Southern Europe, 15% in India. Pretty soon it starts adding up. So,
and why is the genetic footprint so large for these steppe groups?
Because it's raining men.
Just a lot of people.
Well, no. A lot of guys.
Ah.
A lot of guys, probably a polygamous environment. And so there's a site, on my podcast, people should check out Razib Khan's Unsupervised Learning. I do a 2-week delay for the non-subscribers so everyone can access that. Christian Christiansen, a Danish archaeologist, has done extensive work on this. Not just him, though. Basically, what you see in Northern Europe is a situation where there are men from the outside, from the steppe. They tend to come in paternal lineage groups, so all the men are related. So they're a band of brothers. And they acquire women from the local populations. And the paternal lineages of the local populations disappear. So you can connect the dots how that might have happened. There are some cases where we've caught violence in action, but historically, men do not stop reproducing of their own will.
Okay, but there have been many groups and clans and tribes made of many men in the past, right? So what was unique?
Yeah, so I think what was unique was that, so the explanation, and I think I did put this, actually, I haven't gotten to this point. So my steppe series is probably going to run a year. I'm going to be honest. I've made it to 2,500 BC after 20,000 some words. So, when Genghis Khan was conquering northern China, he wanted to drive the peasants off, so basically kill them all, and turn it into pasture land. And his advisor, his Katai advisor, and the Katai were a formerly steppe group that had been settled in China, said, you will make more money, you will be richer if you let the peasants live and extract taxes out of them. So this is the standard thing. You're a guy on a horse, you think it's easier and funner to extract and extort wealth out of settled populations, which in the aggregate are far more wealthy. You as an economist, political scientists know how that works. It's just the numbers, aggregate wealth, rather than being a shepherd or a cattle herder. I don't think the Indo-Europeans had this ideology. I don't think what Samo Burgia, my friend Samo Burgia, he has the idea of social technology. I don't think they had the social technology of conquest, co-option, and subjugation. I think that they thought more like, to be frank, animals. Like, this is land. We take this land and we raise cattle on the land.
Right. So a lot of people think of the Mongols as this very uncivilized group, but in a way, what you're saying is that there was something uniquely civilized about, we don't actually have to kill everyone. We can actually let them live.
Yeah.
It's kind of the seeds of a cooperative modus vivendi.
Yeah, and so when I talked about the dialectical synthesis earlier, this is what I'm talking about. The steppe and the settled influenced each other. You can't understand the steppe without understanding settled civilizations, and you can't understand settled civilizations without understanding the steppe. And so the first stage of the steppe settled interaction is the Indo-European migrations 5,000, 4,000 years ago, depending on where you're talking about. And these migrations involved frankly, extermination and absorption, and the Indo-Europeans themselves forgot who they were. So if you talk to when the Romans themselves, they don't remember that they're from the steppe. The people in India don't remember that they're from the steppe. Later groups of steppe people do remember because they had cavalry, they had communication networks. The Mongol communication networks, the Pax Mongolica, went from Hungary all the way to China without, any customs duties. Like, it was an understood, the Golden Family, the family of the Mongols, rule this whole territory. They had the Yasa, they had their law. So we don't have written records of the Indo-Europeans. We do know that there are people that are buried in the Altai in Western Mongolia who are closely related to people that are buried in Hungary. So we know that they went all over the place, but they might not have had like the modern ideology and system of communication across these vast territories.
So the Mongols had a non-trivial kind of genetic impact on Western Europe as well.
More let's say East Central, and it's very small. So it's on the order of, let's just say, so in Central Asia, it's not trivial at all. Like, let's say like 5 to 10%, something in that range, okay? And then, Central Asia is pretty lightly populated. In Europe itself, probably like less than 1%.
Okay.
There's some groups like Litvak Tatars, like the actor Charles Bronson was half Litvak Tatar.
Really?
Which is why he could play Native Americans, because he looked a little Asian, because he was Asiatic, right? The Indo-Europeans, on the other hand, their first generations in Northern Europe, they're 75% of the population all of a sudden.
Okay.
So instead of a conquering elite on top, they basically just push the local people aside. Kind of more like the Native American white settler model in the United States.
Okay, fascinating. So at a high level, are there any other key points about the steppe that you think contemporary Westerners should know about that they don't currently know about? I remember a few years ago I read the Jack Weatherford book.
Yeah. His books are basically Genghis Khan was good, actually.
Yeah, that's basically it. And I remember one of the takeaways from that book was basically, if I recall the argument correctly, is that in a way Genghis Khan paved the way for modern governments because he centralized the clans, I think it was, or something like that.
Yeah, so his system was pretty rationalized. I mean, they're not, look, they're not like supermen. They had to have organization and skill to do what they did, which is repeatedly conquer settled societies. Okay, so they had to have internal organization in terms of like, okay, what do people need to know? I think what people need to know is the steppe, the Eurasian steppe, is kind of like the ocean. It's a connection network. It's really easy to connect across this network. The Mongols had their own Pony Express type system. And, even 5,000 years ago, I mean, let's talk 4,000 years ago, the light war chariot was invented probably in northern Kazakhstan among the Sintashta people of the Andronova horizon, and it shows up all across Eurasia within the next, say, 1 to 500 years. Like, this light war chariot is clearly the prototype of the Shang dynasty war chariot around 1300 BCE. Right? And this is obviously from the steppe. There are Iranian influences in the early Mongols in terms of the burial structures. And cultural influences, there are probably Iranians in the Ordos region of northern China. When you see the Battle of Kadesh, where the Hittites versus the Egyptians, those are light war chariots from the steppe. There's a woman who was buried in a well in Syria. I think she dates to like 1450 BC. They call her the woman in the well. She wasn't buried. She was thrown down the well. Her genetic ancestry is clearly exactly the same as people in Kazakhstan at that period.
So how much do you agree with the argument that the Mongols were good, actually?
This is awkward because my last name's Khan.
Oh, yeah, you're biased.
No, I'm not descended from. I know what my Y chromosome is. This is a really. I mean, I don't want to be glib about this.
'Cause they were brutal.
Well, so it's pretty clear there was climate change due to the number of people killed in Central Eurasia because there was reforestation. So they were green. Genghis Khan was an environmentalist. He was the first, let's just say the Mongols were the first deep ecologists,
Wow. Wait, what do you mean by that?
So deep ecology is the idea that...
No, I know that.
Yeah.
I mean, unpack what you were saying about forestation.
So many people died that the forest grew back.
Oh, I see what you're saying.
Like,
Okay.
there is the suggestion that they caused global cooling.
But it wasn't a conscious game
No.
plan, right? Okay, yeah.
They actually didn't want the people to... So the Mongols used, as you know from the Weatherford books, they used terror and genocide as an instrument. That wasn't their ends. Their ends was to be rich, although Genghis Khan did tell his sons, like, be careful of getting too soft, Were they actually good? I would say no. I'm going to have to be honest. Destroying Baghdad, what they did... I mean, Iran didn't recover until the 20th century, arguably, from the Mongol conquest, the destruction of their infrastructure, the Qanat system. That took a while. They didn't have like too much of an impact on Europe, but there is an argument that Russian autocracy, which I think is plausible, I think it's probably correct, is actually modeled on and a reaction to the Tatar yoke of the Mongols. So the Russian czars, they claim to be heirs of the Roman emperors, the East Roman emperors, but to be entirely frank, I think they are the heirs of, the Mongol Khans. The Prince of Muscovy achieved of the Danilevich lineage, achieved his prominence through the patronage and support given by the Tatar Khan, by the Mongol Khan of the Golden Horde. And so I don't think Russian I'm just not into authoritarian. I'm not like super anti-mole bug or anything like that. I'm not like a naive lib here. But all things equal, authoritarianism is not good. And so that was bad. I do think they did integrate the world system. And so if you read a book called, I think it's called like The Pride and the Plenty, but it's about like how the world economic system, really you can date it to the Mongol period. That's when it really starts, the integrated globalized system where, China was just a rumor before that to most of Europe, but then you had like people like Marco Polo. I do think he went to China. There are people like Marco Polo who actually went to China and came back regularly starting during that period. And so I think the Mongol conquests are kind of the preamble to the Age of Discovery, which is a European way of looking at it. But the Age of Discovery starting in the 16th century, the whole world island, Africa, Eurasia, everything, they kind of touched it. They didn't get into Africa because they were defeated in Syria, but they would have, Okay. So I think it's on the whole probably bad, but it's such a mixed bag that it's hard to say.
Fascinating. Excellent answer, though. So let's talk a little bit about CRISPR. So this is one of the most interesting technologies that's rapidly advancing right now. It's becoming cheaper, more accurate, and it's basically gene editing is what we're talking about.
Yeah.
So I want to know from you, since you know a lot about this, I'm curious, what does the near future look like, specifically in terms of like, am I going to soon have kind of consumer technologies where I'm going to be able to edit my own genes? How soon is that going to come? And concretely, what kinds of things am I realistically going to be able to do with that?
Yeah. So, just for the viewer listener, CRISPR technology is revolutionary. It's really, the science of it has been around for a couple of decades, but really its application to genetic engineering, that phrase, is less than 10 years old now. It really started in 2012. I saw a sea change among my friends that worked in like bench applied biology within about 1 to 2 years, where they abandoned all of the other types of genetic engineering technologies they were using. And so previously there were genetic engineering technologies that were specialized to like this or that. They were good for mice. They were good for plants. It was just like clunky. It didn't scale. CRISPR is great because it's cheap, it's easy, it's in a kit. And so there are people, I think his last name is Zane. There's a guy who like injects himself with CRISPR and does all sorts of things, and he sells kits. And so it's gotten that far.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
I got to look him up. That sounds cool.
Yeah, look him up. But I've had some Twitter interactions with him. So how is it going to affect you? Okay, let's think about it. So it's cheap, it's easy, it's targeted. Obviously, it's going to hit agriculture intensely. So I think like it will increase productivity on the margin in the near future, pretty obviously, and immediately. You could imagine something like, okay, like, I don't know, you want a blue banana.
Okay.
You know what? And I put that idea out there. If anyone wants to market a blue banana, just saying, I already had the idea. That was my idea. You're taking there. Anyway, but I'm saying like, I can imagine someone like, I like blue bananas,
Okay.
And so you genetically engineer a banana. It's just a banana, but it has a blue peel.
Right.
Okay. Now this is not useful in any way.
Right.
But it's possible now.
Okay.
I think you could do something.
Can
like
I make my skin blue? Can
I
identify as a blue alien?
As a blue man?
Yeah.
Yeah, you could. So this is actually a question because there's a lot of people that want blue eyes, and I would suggest you just get contacts. But like you can imagine a situation where you could CRISPR the tissue in your eye so that the melanocytes stop expressing.
CRISPR is not great branding. It kind of sounds like you're going to fry your eyeballs out.
Yeah, I wouldn't recommend this. But
so what other knobs can I turn? Like, can I jack up my strength? Can I jack up my intelligence? How soon can we jack up our intelligence?
In theory, so the issue with CRISPR, not the issue. The thing with CRISPR is it's genetic engineering, right? You have about 19,000 genes. Okay, you have 3 billion base pairs. Of those, on the order of say 100 million are variable. A lot of them are private to you. And so CRISPR is great because it's cheap, it's targeted, and there are a few off-target effects. off-target effects are mutations, are mistakes. And there have been issues and there could be issues with people who get CRISPR gene editing for curing diseases and then they get cancer because cancers are mutations. Okay? So it's not without risk. Now, right now, as we are recording, they are working, from what I know, on trials of CRISPR cures for things like cystic fibrosis, sickle cell anemia, which has been reported in the media. I think amyloidosis, I think like what the science fantasy author Robert Jordan died of, some blood disease. It was actually in the news a couple of days ago. So there are adults with severe illnesses right now that are due to one gene. So I think cystic fibrosis is usually a mutation in CFTR. You usually die in your 40s now, which is way better than dying when you're 10, like a century ago. But, I mean, would you want to die in your 40s?
No, so solving genetic diseases
Yeah,
is going to be the first line
in this
of,
decade,
yeah.
in the 2020s. I think by the end. So I have an acquaintance. His name is anyway. I have an acquaintance who has a daughter, a young daughter. I think less than a year now, who has cystic fibrosis. I don't know this guy well, but I'm close friends with a friend of his, and I just said, honestly, I would not worry about her adulthood. She's never going to be a marathon runner. But they will be able to deliver enough of the fix to her lung tissue that she will have usable lung and she will probably live to a ripe old age.
And so will it ever be possible to juice up my intelligence through CRISPR, or that's just too complex? It's too many genes.
It would be possible, but it is not a trivial engineering task. So the issue of juicing up your intelligence is you probably have thousands of positions that you would need to tweak. And so if there's a trivial number of mutations per position, but you start multiplying by thousands, the trade-off is going to start kicking in.
Meaning, like, I think I'm jacking up my intelligence, but actually I just grow a third eyeball or something.
Yeah, I mean, so like, let's assume there's like there's one error out of 1,000, okay? And you have to fix like 4 mutations within CFTR or whatever, cystic fibrosis, and then you have to deliver it into your tissues. So the delivery problem is actually probably the bigger issue. It's like, how do you get to the tissues with like, I think like they use viral vectors, they use other things, you know? But I think they might use mRNA now. But in any case, so how do you get it in? Let's assume you can get it in there. You have like 1 out of 1,000 chance of a mutation. You have cystic fibrosis. You don't really care, okay? Like you want some lung tissue or you're gonna die. Okay, 1 out of 1,000 mutation chance is fine. You're probably going to get like, you're going to have like a lot of edits going on in there because you're not just going to like edit one cell unless you want to do some stem cell transplant, which like you could grow your organs at some point in the future, probably a couple of decades. But in any case, you're going to have a risk of having some side effects, perhaps cancer late in life. But you know what? You're going to make it to late in life.
Right. So it sounds like to solve a very specific, acute, and certain problem, it will be worth the risks and the costs. Yes. But just trying to increase a general variable that's more desirable, especially if it's complex, is going to make too much risk, too much complexity for not enough of an urgent
I mean,
payoff.
right now, but it might not be. So from what I understand, your IQ is not average.
Me? Personally?
Yeah, I'm just saying.
Yeah,
like,
it's below average.
No, I'm just saying if your IQ is like if you have a very low IQ child, it might actually be worth it. I'm not gonna lie, because it might be some large effect mutation you want. You know what I'm saying? Not necessarily even Down syndrome, but there could be like big breakages that happen because of mutations during the meiosis process. You want to go in there and fix it as soon as possible. That might be easier and better than giving them a drug. Because ultimately, you're affecting a biological process. But it might be an issue where you want to go and hit the fetus as soon as possible. You do. So here's a scenario. You do sequencing really early on. We figure out ways to sequence really early in the pregnancy. And there's a huge effect mutation. You're pro-life. You don't believe in abortion. So what do?
CRISPR.
You want to bathe the fetus with the cure as soon as possible as the brain is developing.
And physically, what are we talking about? Injecting molecules? Like, what are we doing?
Yeah, I mean, so it's been a while since I've like looked at this because like these. So the hard problem with a lot of this is how do you get it into the cells, right? And so one way that people have traditionally done it is like infection with viruses. So they're not virulent. They don't do anything bad, but the viruses get in there and they're carrying whatever you are using to snip and cut,
Mhm.
And so yeah, I mean, so you got to transfect the cell somehow. You have to get it to the cell or bathe it, with the CRISPR-Cas9 molecule.
And can you buy this stuff yet, or like where do you go to obtain this stuff?
Well, I mean, I don't want to get in trouble.
What do you mean? It's like black
There
market? Black
are
market?
people selling CRISPR kits. I don't know like how legal it is. So I mean, put it. You'll find when this show.
In 10 years, the Other Life podcast is shilling like IQ supplement products through CRISPR packs.
Yeah, it's like you could be like, this CRISPR ointment makes my skin beautiful.
Fascinating. Okay. So
here's an idea. Actually, skin. Let me think about this. Again, this is my idea. So if someone wants to take it, but so your skin gets less and less. Your skin ages. What I was taught. Because of mitochondria that mutate over time and don't DNA repair. And so by the end of your lifetime, most of your mitochondria in your cells, the mitochondria is the powerhouse of the cell, are kind of damaged. I can imagine a situation where you want to fix the mitochondria. You target it with CRISPR. Now, you could have mutations, but mitochondria are already broken. So what's the problem? So you fix the mitochondria, all of a sudden you keep the young skin.
wow.
That's just a thought.
So you could imagine your skin totally rejuvenating.
Yeah, because
Yeah.
if I mean, I don't think it's just the mitochondria, but I was told that like the weird as people age, their skin is less supple,
Right.
and I was told that was because the cells have a lot of broken mitochondria, and so they don't produce the same type of energy, they don't DNA repair in the same way, all this stuff, and so like let's say that you can fix these mutations in your skins. Now imagine that you only have enough ointment just for your arm. You could have like a really nice arm, but the rest of your body is.
I mean, I think that as I approach the age of natural death, I would become less risk averse.
Yes, that's exactly
right.
That's exactly by the end of your life. Well, by the end of your life, you do people do all sorts of crazy things for those extra 6 months.
Right.
And I can imagine a scenario where you extend your life 6 months, but you're probably gonna die. But that's better than you have 6 months to do your take care of your affairs. I mean, that's what a lot of cancer treatment is about. It's about extending life. It's not about saving your life.
So something that you referred to was genotyping. And so this would be a kind of preliminary step in this process of basically just kind of downloading the genomic data.
Reading it.
That's what you mean, right? And tell me about the technological stack for doing that. How do you do that concretely?
Yeah, there's several different. So genotyping on an array is a chip. It's a chip that you put the DNA on after it's been amplified. So 23andMe, these companies, you get the cheek cell. The cheek cells are sent to the lab. The lab PCR amplifies it, produces a lot of amplified DNA, and the DNA is put on the chip. And I don't remember the technology now, but basically they read the positions on the chip aligned to positions in your genome, and they return a state. They return a signal state. Okay. And so, the 23andMe has a 650,000 position chip out of your 3 billion base pairs and your 100 out of the 10 million common polymorphisms, right? So genotype, that's genotyping. Another thing you do, which is going to be more and more common and probably ubiquitous in 10 years, you just read out the whole genome as a sequence. And so the way that works is they're reading out reads. And so you have all these stacked reads that come out and you use a computer to like reconstruct and assemble the single.
And that's more data.
It's not just more data, it is the complete data.
So that's the superior way of doing it.
Yeah, I mean, genotyping is reduced representation of the data.
And how many bytes is that?
So the aligned, like the cleaned up aligned genotype uncompressed or sequence, I think it's about 3 gigabytes.
Okay, so you can do this on consumer computer.
Yeah, so
technology,
I have I had my son older son sequence before he was born.
right.
And it was on 10x, which meant that I sampled his genome 10 times. Normally for medical you do it 30. So you read the genome 30 times because there's errors each time. And so you want to like each position you want to sample like 30 times. Okay? And so I don't remember. It wasn't like 400 gigs. It might have been like 200 gigabytes of the raw read. And then I like pull that down and eventually you went down to 3.
And how did you do it? Did you just ask a doctor to extract a sample, or?
Well, they can Google MIT Tech Review Razib Khan.
No, I've read about it,
Yeah.
but do you go into that kind of detail concretely about how, like, what were the steps you took to actually get that?
The steps that I took was basically we told the doctor what to do, and the doctor did it, and then we bullied the laboratory to get the DNA back, because this was not done, and it still is not done.
And the laboratory, meaning like you just find a DNA laboratory?
Well, the people who did the amplification and got the DNA, they did not want to return the raw DNA to us, because
that's weird.
Yeah, that's weird.
Yeah.
And so I basically went to Twitter and I said, like, what's up with this? Why aren't they giving me back my genetic material? And Rebecca Skloot was like, well, that's really bad. And so then they called her and like, we'll give you back the genetic material.
And so what did the doctor have to do? Is it like a injection? Is it a
So what the doctor
swab,
did was a Coriano-Villi sampling, which is actually like a little bit of tissue off the placenta in utero. They do that for certain types of genotyping. They kind of stopped doing that.
And this is while your wife is pregnant?
Yes.
Okay.
They kind of stopped doing that. Now what they're doing is they actually take there's fetal cells, fetal DNA in your wife's blood, and that's how they do the non-invasive prenatal testing for stuff like Down syndrome. And in the future, they will be able to sequence the fetus just by a blood draw from the. I mean, right now, again, like there's not that many cells in there.
So I think this is super interesting, and I think a lot of people listening to this or watching this might actually be interested in doing this for themselves. So before we move on, I wonder if we could zero in even more concretely, like literally what would the words be if you went to your doctor and you have a pregnant wife
Sure.
and you wanted to do what you did? What would you say to the doctor?
I would say that I want to figure out a way to do whole genome sequencing on the fetus. And basically, we want to do a blood draw and then talk to the laboratory about getting the amplified DNA back. Because right now, there's no pipeline that I know of where it goes from amplified DNA to like they do a whole genome sequencing.
So to send the bodily fluids to the lab, you need the doctor to do that? Or
yes, you
so
do
you
need.
Can't do that yourself?
Not really. I mean, you can kind of try to bully the lab. It's a gray land because it's asked so little. They want the doctor to approve on it.
Okay.
And we kind of had to bully the doctor and the genetic counselor. Now, most people do not have a geneticist in the family. So, it really helped that I knew my stuff.
Well, that's what this podcast is here for. Now,
Yeah.
Now everyone has the geneticist in the family.
Yeah, but I mean that you need to like know your stuff and go to them, and they know that you know what you want.
Okay.
So they'll feel comfortable signing off because they don't really know.
Gotcha. And when the lab gives you results, they're basically giving you a data file. Is that right?
Yeah, they're giving you a data file. What you want, because they're not going to do sequencing. They might not be able to do sequencing. It depends. There's some issues with like, do you need to sample tissue? Do you go cell-free? What you need is they get the DNA of the fetus somehow. With the Down syndrome prenatal testing, I don't think they need to do too much because what they're looking for are chromosomal abnormalities. And so those can be pretty coarse, But what you need is like figure out a way if they can get the amplified DNA. Okay. And that's not trivial with a blood draw. It's much easier if they did amnio or something like that. But they don't do that too much anymore because there might be some risk of miscarriage. Those studies are kind of crappy. There's just not enough good sample to know.
Okay.
But a lot of it is just going straight to the blood draw now. And we will have a situation in the next decade where you can get a blood draw from your wife early in pregnancy, and they will be able to sequence the fetus.
Okay. Interesting. And so when you get that data file from the lab, what are the top questions in your mind? Like, what are you looking for? And what do you think average people, especially if they're having children, what should they most be looking for?
The number one thing is you want to look for known mutations associated with congenital diseases. Just to know ahead of time, a lot of people will want to have abortion. So the prenatal the non-invasive prenatal testing means that in the United States today, there's far fewer children with Down syndrome than there would be, because most people choose to abort. Now, if you're a 20-something, they might not automatically offer it to you, and if you don't ask, does that make sense?
Yeah.
Last I checked, and this has been a couple of years, if you're 35 and above, insurance automatically covers it, and they bring it up with you. And they just kind of assume you will abort, to be frank. I had a friend who, he's pro-life, and the doctor was a little surprised, I think, that they did not
Right. And so you're looking for genetic diseases, basically.
That's the first thing you want to look for. If everything comes back clean, like you could, like I think Prometheus still works. Like there are these like tools you can look for risks. If everything looks good, okay, then you want to predict traits. So, for example, I knew my son was going to be a little lighter haired, a little darker skinned, and like this is weird, but he's gonna have dry earwax, which he does. I could just like look at traits of interest.
And how much domain expertise in genetics does one have to do to execute those analyses on the computer? Like, is this something you can Google, like what the R code for predicting?
Yeah. So Prometheus, the disease part, there's a lot of modules out there for you to just like take the raw data and let it run, and then it pops out a list rank ordered by odds ratio and base rates.
Okay.
The characteristics, no, there's not much stuff out there because, I mean, maybe we could talk about starting a company doing that, because people haven't had the data, they haven't thought about it. I mean, what are people interested in? Are they interested in eye color? Are they interested in, how much they sweat? I don't know.
Right.
People haven't thought about that because they're so focused on disease.
Well, I think personality would be most interesting, right? People
Yeah,
wanna know that.
you could do some predictions. How robust they are on the individual level is a little off. I mean, have you read Plowman's book?
No.
Okay, so basically, genomic prediction of stuff like intelligence is not trivial, but it's really noisy. And so what I would be curious about would be if the offspring is predicted to be like 3 standard deviations above or below the norm, which is going to be rare. But when that happens, that's a significant prediction, and you need to take note of it.
Right.
There are going to be cases where you're like, okay, this kid is definitely going to be smart.
This kid's going to be a psychopath. Yeah.
There are going to be cases where you see like risk factors for various things due to mutations. So autism, schizophrenia, these are highly heritable, about like 70 to 80% heritable, which means that that's the proportion of variance in the population due to genes. And so I do think that people are going to be profiling their offspring ahead of time because these have environmental interactions, all these things. Schizophrenia gets, quote, triggered, and so I want to know. I mean, I don't know because we haven't had the technology yet for my children and they seem fine. But, if you have a family history of these sorts of things, I think people will want to know. I think people will do gene sequencing and screening. I think they will do pre-implantation diagnosis because having a child with schizophrenia or autism, it's not the end of the world, but it's difficult.
Right. So you would suggest using something like Prometheus, which is a tool that lets you do this, doing the raw analyses in something like R. That's probably above most people's pay grade. Like you have to.
Yeah, I think you could do it, but most people can't do it.
But you're saying I could.
I think
so.
You
If
could.
you do have expertise with data,
if you're
science,
a data scientist,
if you're a data
scientist grade person, you can do it. The only thing is, like, I would suggest that, like, I mean, these are 3 gigabyte files when they're cleaned down, so you're gonna have to do some data munging and paring down. But once you get it to that stage, yeah, what is it? It's a text file with a string, with 2 strings actually, but whatever. They're just strings. You know how to manipulate strings.
Yeah,
that's a big strings.
It's fascinating. Probably one of the most interesting files on your computer. Your child's
and I do
genetic data.
Yeah, and I do have it. Encrypted on a cloud somewhere. I'm not going to say what, but yeah, and like I have my own sequence. You can Google Razib Khan genotype. You can pull down my genotypes and my VCF file, which is from my whole genome.
Fascinating.
Like mine is public.
And so do you predict that sometime soon you'll be able to use that data to make a clone of your child if you wanted to?
I mean, yeah. If I wanted to, I'm thinking like how much.
Or if your child wanted to, I guess it'd be up to them.
No, because there are going to be rich people who are going to clone themselves within the next 10 to 20 years.
Within 10 to 20 years.
Yes, I believe so.
Wow.
They might keep it on the down low.
And I mean, what is the technology they'll use to do that?
So you have, well, I mean, they can get their own. I mean, they can do it now. They can get their tissues. I think stem cell technology is getting a lot better. And so I think you could clone yourself just from your own cells.
But it's going to cost a ton for a while.
Yeah. I think you got to be like a billionaire or 100 million. I don't know. But I think it's doable. And so like if.
All right, I'm looking for a patron who's out there who wants to clone me. That'd be awesome.
You know what? Just wait until like Peter and Elon have their clone armies and they've like made it cheaper through economies of scale.
Damn. That's awesome. All right. So another topic that that was awesome, by the way. It was an excellent masterclass in genotyping in a practical way. So another topic that you're very interested in your newsletter is ancient DNA. I'm curious what kinds of What are the big puzzles that you think ancient DNA might soon solve,
Sure.
and what do you think the solution to those puzzles will be?
Yeah, so when you take a genome sequence of one individual, what you're doing is you're sequencing their whole pedigree. So you're sampling a human pedigree. So one thing people don't understand, they have difficulty understanding, is one individual is actually a. Can I swear?
Yeah, I think so. Sure.
That's a fuck ton of information.
Yeah.
You get 3 billion base pairs. That's 3 billion potential variables. Now I already told you that really only a small percentage of your genome is truly variable. So that small percentage is on the order of 10 to 100 million, depending on how you count it. Okay? That's a lot of variables. And so when people say, oh, it's only one genome, it's only one individual, that's 10 to 100 million variables. That's a lot of information, and you're sampling an individual's pedigree. So if they're representative, so if you're representative of Eurasians, I can tell you from your genome that your ancestors went through a bottleneck, that our ancestors went through a bottleneck, 50 to 70,000 years ago, with a population of on the order of 1,000 every generation for that many years. These are the things that you can tell. A whole species history is there in your genome, right? So when we get ancient DNA, when it's high quality, this is the sort of thing they can do. Now, it's not always high quality. You can't always do that, right? But you have this phylogenetic tree that we've been creating in science for these decades, and now we can pop in the internal nodes.
Fascinating. So do you think substantively, though, what are the myths that you think people currently believe that will be disproven by ancient DNA?
Well, I mean, one thing that has been disproven by ancient DNA is continuity. So the idea was, humans spread out of Africa, they just kind of settled, and everyone's descended from the first people there. It turns out there's been multiple turnovers almost everywhere. So the first settlers often don't last, they don't stick. People get replaced, there's migration, there's replacement, there's competition. So that's definitely been a new revolution. I think one myth in terms of people, what they think is, there's been a lot of phenotypic evolution, and, we can infer it. We can look at the genome and make a statistical calculation, but it's different when you can concretely see it. So I can tell you that, I saw some Iron Age samples from Estonia, and something I think it was 70% of the alleles of the genetic variants for eye color were for blue eyes. Today it's 95%. And that's 2,500 years. There was no overall genome-wide change. There was no population moving in.
So what does that mean?
That means there was natural selection.
Does that mean that humans prefer blue eyes?
Well, people in Northeast Europe have way more blue eyes than they did 2,000 years ago.
Well, I'm saying, what do you think is the mechanism?
We don't know.
Do you think people are more likely to abort brown-eyed kids or something like that?
I think people today are, but we don't really know. I mean, people in the past, they had different preferences because they were on the Malthusian margin, right? I think it's not implausible that, because pigmentation pathways are hooked into a lot of. So if you take testosterone, you're going to get darker.
Darker skin?
Yeah, because because what happens is
I'm thinking about it, by the way.
Testosterone upregulates your melanocortin. So if you look at a lot of these gym bros, you start noticing they're a little swarthy.
Fascinating. I always assumed that was tanning.
Yeah, they do tan.
Okay.
But yeah, when men hit puberty, they get darker. After women hit menopause, they get darker because their testosterone to estrogen ratio shifts. So estrogen tends to make you paler, testosterone makes you darker, and that's just a side effect of the fact that all these hormonal pathways are mixed in together.
Fascinating. Well, watchers of the show will know that if I start looking like a brown guy, it's because I'm jacked up on testosterone. Fascinating.
I think they will maybe notice because of the thickness of the neck first, but
Yeah. Okay, interesting. So, any other puzzles that you think will be solved that will blow people's minds? When it comes?
So there's the adaptation. How much adaptation there has been? That's going to blow people's minds. I think. What else would it be? I think another thing that'll blow people's minds, and I think this is true, and I think there's enough suggestive evidence about it, is that in the past, people were much more diverse in a local region. The last 10,000 years, especially the last 5,000 years, has been the great mixing. In terms of, so for example, in Germany 5,000 years ago, 7 to 5,000 years ago, there was so much segregation between hunter-gatherers and farmers that their genetic distance in Germany, in a local Länder, right, in a local province, was as great as the genetic distance between modern Western Europeans and Chinese.
Okay, that's fascinating because that definitely pushes back against some of the kind of chauvinist, often kind of racist imaginations people have about, all of human history, people lived in, racially homogenous groups.
Yeah, everything was really different back then. So, for example, the Pleistocene, the Europeans at the beginning of the Holocene, after the end of the last ice age, were very different than the ones today. They're not genetically super similar, but they had very dark skin, and they almost all had blue eyes. Like, no population in the world looks like that today. The farmers that came in from the Middle East had light skin and dark eyes. So modern Europeans kind of combine the two. They have light skin, and Northern Europeans have light eyes. And so a lot of the combinations that you see around today in the world are new. So someone that looked like me didn't exist 5,000 years ago because my genetic combination only really came into being like 4,000 to 3,000 years ago.
Wow, 4,000 to 3,000
Like
years ago. So not
pretty
that
much
long
all
ago.
brown people.
Fascinating.
Or South Asian, subcontinental, whatever you want to call it, you know?
Interesting. So on this topic of what people look like, it's interesting to note that one of the hot topics today is that we know the American population is changing. A lot of people speculate that white people will no longer be a majority sometime around in the 2040s.
Yeah, depending on what you count as white.
Well, okay, that's something interesting we could go into. But what question you're making me think about is that I think in the popular imagination, what this means in America is that the average person in 2040s, 2050s is going to be a kind of vaguely brown skin.
Yeah, I need to do a Substack on this. This is
hit me.
This is a fundamental problem with how people understand genetics. They think of it as a blending process. It's not a blending process. It's discrete digital information that's recombined every generation. Otherwise, everyone would already look like tan Oompa Loompas. Like that's what you're imagining, right?
Well, because there was a Time cover, right? There was a Time magazine cover not too long ago.
But that's the average human. That's not the... There's always going to be variation. So if you go to Brazil, everyone doesn't look the same.
Right.
There's people who look black. There's people that look like you. There's a lot of people in the middle, and there's a distribution. And so what you see with pigmentation is you can think of it as like binomial variance.
Mm-hmm.
And so there's going to be a distribution. There will always be people that look a certain way from the ancestral type because of the recombination of things. There's going to be new people. So I have a friend, and she is 1/4 Russian. Her paternal grandfather was Russian and 3/4 Han Chinese, and she married a white American man. And they have a daughter who looks pretty much Eurasian, but she has bright blue eyes. Okay? And that's because the mom is 1/4 Russian, and she inherited the copy from her father, who has brown eyes, and she herself has brown eyes. But she inherited the copy from her paternal grandfather. And blue eyes is a recessive trait. So that paternal copy came back. Her husband has blue eyes. And so now she has a daughter who looks pretty Asian, not like, she's Eurasian, but she has bright blue eyes. Right? That's a new combination through admixture.
But when you say there's going to be new people, aren't you kind of assuming that these new types you're describing are going to kind of cluster and then reproduce in a sufficient kind of consistency that it'll be a known type? Is that what you think will happen? Or
I think there's going to be correlations. So for example, in China or in New York City, in a period between like 1980 and up to about like the early 2000s, there are a lot of Jewish girls of Han Chinese racial backgrounds because they were adopted by Jewish families in New York City. It was just a thing. China cut that pipeline off about like 15 years ago, I think, for various political reasons. But these girls are raised as Jews. They're probably going to marry Jewish guys. So there's going to be a lot of mixed Asian Jews.
And you're saying over time that will become its own kind of almost like a racial category?
Well, I'm just saying a lot of Ashkenazi Jews in the United States will have Asian heritage, and it's not a big deal.
Sure.
It's just going to be kind of understood. Probably because of class, they're going to be less likely to have Latino heritage. Okay, because Latinos tend to be more working class. They live in the Southwest, et cetera, et cetera. So you're going to see certain combinations more common than other combinations. And I think that's what you're leading to, and I think that's going to happen.
Fascinating. So the picture that people have in their mind of America in 2050, where everyone is just a kind of light brown, kind of homogenous
that's
mixture,
false.
That's false.
Yeah.
But you did acknowledge that would maybe be the average.
If you average everyone together,
but of course, no person is an average of everyone else. So
I mean, maybe in theory, assuming total random mating, which is not going to happen, you could have an average. You could have a mode. Right? So the most common for the listener viewer, right?
Right.
The most common person could look like that. I'm not going to dox my children, but I mean, they're like tan people with brown hair and hazel eyes.
Mm-hmm.
I mean,
so the real story that is more important and substantively significant is that there'll just be more heterogeneity.
Yes, there's going to be more. The range the variance will increase, the range will increase. Like, you go to Brazil, you can find people in Brazil, Cape Verde, some of these places, with blonde afros.
Yeah.
And they're not dyeing it. They have
Yeah.
blonde hair, and they have like African textured hair. So that's going to be a thing. There will be people who look pretty Asian to you, and yet they have like your hair color and blue eyes. And there are already some people like that. You just go to Finland,
Okay, fascinating. So you wrote recently about an interesting topic. You wrote about the question of whether we can speak about evolution as having a kind of directionality.
Okay.
And it was an interesting essay where you kind of went through other people's perspectives, but I felt like you kind of left us hanging on your own perspective. So I'm curious what you think when it comes to, for people listening, and the basic story here is that most people, I would say, probably educated opinion today, generally sees evolution as an inherently directionless phenomena.
Yeah.
But some people, some very smart people in different times and places have argued that there is a way of seeing a certain direction to it.
Yeah.
You cite in your essay people like Pierre Chardin, and then more contemporary writers like Robert Wright.
Yeah.
A lot of people do think you can see a directionality in evolution. I'm curious where you come down on that. Do you think it's reasonable or correct to see a certain directionality in evolution, specifically towards, let's say, greater complexity, or perhaps we might even say greater intelligence, or perhaps the opposite way, perhaps greater entropy? How do you think about it?
So, I mean, I think there's a probabilistic situation. So if you rewound the clock and ran it again, there's going to be a range of outcomes. I guess I would say, like, just the empirical data and what we've seen in different lineages of living organisms probably is some directionality towards greater complexity, because, I mean, if being a bacteria was the best, was the most, everyone would be a bacteria.
Yeah.
There are niches where greater complexity adds value on the margin. So I think so. I mean, in the long term, it's heat death, entropy, that's going to kick in at some point. But in the medium time scale, at this level of granularity, it's quite clear that, to me, that there is greater complexity with human cultures. You see greater complexity. That's a cultural evolutionary process, not a biological one, but the same process applies. Human cultures are they're changing much faster. So ancient Egypt, as a unified culture that we would understand and recognize, flourished between 3000 BC and about 1000 BC. That's 2000 years. That's as long as between us and Julius Caesar. And like we probably would like not recognize culturally someone from 200 years ago. So the rate of cultural change has increased. I think that does pose a problem with our social technology, where we could just burn out as a species. Like, maybe that's the answer to the Fermi paradox. We just start changing, and like by the end, we're like changing every minute, and we just go insane. So ultimately, does it have a directionality? The directionality might be just end to end, right? But in the time scales that we're curious about, I think it is towards more complexity, more intricacy. Yes. So
Interesting. So if complexity and change is the directionality baked into evolutionary processes, then one could interpret that as a data point in favor of the kind of trad philosophy of simplicity, Lindy, go back to basics, perhaps, right? Is that the way to escape the great filter?
Well, I think the what I worry about, and what I think is an argument for trad simplicity would be, we might get caught up in a cultural riptide. It's like the waves are getting higher, they're crashing more, we're like surfing, it's awesome. And then like in 100 years, nobody has children because everyone's just masturbating 24/7. I don't know, because like their porn is so immersive and so much better than reality.
So this is a great point. Let's talk about this matter of different people having children and other people not having children.
Yeah.
So if you look, we know a lot about what types of people have children. And it kind of relates to what I was saying before about the directionality of American demographics, in that if religious people, as we know, are more likely to have children, and right now it seems to me that there's a particular subset of kind of modern, rationalistic, secularistic, careerist, cosmopolitan types who in America seem less likely to have children.
Yeah.
How do you see this playing out, and what are the kind of the most interesting takes, whether that be genetically or politically or what?
Yeah.
How do you look at that phenomenon?
Well, so Eric Kaufman had this book, Shall the Religious Inherit the Earth, like over 10 years ago. I think that has a lot of good insights in it. I do think culturally, anti-natalism has a short shelf life. It's just, it can't, I mean, by definition, tautologically, it can't become dominant and last for very long. Eventually, the minority of people that want children will just inherit the earth because they're the only ones who have children. Now, you could have a situation where, their children are converted every generation, some sort of equilibrium state. I think that's what we're seeing. Religious people have had more children than non-religious people for at least 200 years, probably. But Americans getting more and more secular because, they're being converted, right? And so you can have an equilibrium culturally, but I do think that our current ages, like fixation on individual self-actualization, hedonism, and just living for the now, I think that has a short shelf life. I mean, look at the doubling time of the Amish. There's going to be hundreds and hundreds of thousands of Amish, and there's going to be more than 1 million Amish, I think, by the end of the century.
So basically, what you're saying is that this is a non-issue because the atheist, careerist types who don't want to have kids are just going to exit the gene pool.
Yeah, don't hate on atheist careers too much. But
Oh no, I'm not. But,
yeah.
But you know what I'm talking about.
Yeah. I mean, when they say, when people say that, I saw something in the New York Times or somewhere where it was basically like, don't have children. I had children when I was young, and it was a horrible decision. You should just go travel and experience the world. And to be judgmental, I just like, God, you're such a hedonistic, pathetic human being. Like I'm being editorial here.
Sure.
I don't, I'm just like, okay. I mean, I've traveled the world.
I know. I was just gonna say you can travel the world when you're in your 20s and then also have a family.
Yeah, but it's just like I don't get this whole idea. It's like I gotta smell the mountains on the other side of the world as well as the mountain. I mean, I'm just saying like children versus another building.
Right.
I mean, I think buildings are great. I think architecture is great. I think nature is great, and different types of nature and architecture are great. But there's something wrong in your value system when children are just like not as exciting.
Right.
And it's not that having children is exciting, but it's rewarding.
Right.
And I'm fine with people saying they don't want to have children. Just don't have children. I don't want to hear about it anymore.
So it sounds like you're not in the camp of people that sees this as a kind of civilizational problem. I
mean, it is a short-term problem, but it will correct itself. We just need to be able to like face it on and understand. So, I mean, there's a fundamental problem. I remember, like, when I was in graduate school, I had a student who was a little older, and, I was talking to her. I was talking about kids because she was married and all this stuff. And I was like, oh, you guys going to have kids? Like, how's that working? And she's like, oh, we're not going to have kids. And I was like, oh, well, I mean, that's good. And she's like, yeah, like, we're saving, and we're going to retire in, like, 20 years or whatever and just, like, travel the world. And I'm like, well, I'm glad that my kids are paying for your retirement. And then she got all offended. She was like, what do you mean you're... And I'm just like, well, where do you think these funds are coming from? Where do you think Social Security and where do you think the mutual funds are investing? It's the future people that are still economically active. And she was like, oh, I had never thought about that. I'm like, exactly. You never thought about that. You're a consumption machine and you think it's all about you. And it's just not like that. There's a whole system. People like me, who have children, more than 2 children, we're the ones that are producing the future economic activity, and we're foregoing our own consumption. I can tell you the things I haven't done in the last decade, but that's fine. It's worth it. So I would do it again, but my only point is there's a smugness to some childless just get on my nerves because they think that, oh, well, they're adding all this value into the world. And I'm like, you're going to be old in a nursing home, and other people's kids are going to have to take care of you, which is fine. But just like understand like the choices you're making. And like when I see articles in the New York Times or the Washington Post, I subscribe to them, so I'm mentioning them, about like being childless and how you're happy. I almost never see anyone above the age of 55. That's suspicious to me. I want to talk to a childless 80-year-old that's super excited about this.
Yeah, there's definitely a selection effect there that might be very misleading for people who read that kind of literature and find it inspiring.
Yeah, I mean, look, I'm healthy. Like, I could have been childless. Like, I could be traveling every weekend and all this stuff,
Yeah, someone should go interview childless 60-year-olds and write some stories in the New York Times about that.
No, the subscribers are paying for that
Yeah,
stuff.
well, that's
you know what I'm
that's
saying? Like
that's
they
the
don't
selection
want
effect, right? That's so yeah. I agree with you. There's some very biased perceptions around that. So, do you think much about genetically engineered bioweapons? This is something that is
Yeah.
quite interesting, and it seems like a very live threat. Does
Yeah.
this keep you up at night, and what do you think about it?
It doesn't because they tend to be so bioweapons are useful if you can do time release, if you can hide your tracks. They could be possibly useful for hiding your tracks, but they're not usually very effective for what you want to do. So if you want to do targeted murder, old school physical weapons are still the best. A bioweapon might be only 80% effective,
But at the scale you're applying it, 80% effective would be way more damage.
Yeah, but it would probably also kill a lot of you.
Okay, so let's break that down. So is the problem that it's not refined enough to be so targeted? So
If it's refined, it doesn't work. If it's precise, you don't get much bang for the buck. And if you get a lot of bang for the buck, it's not precise.
Okay, so let's break that down for a minute, because I think the nightmare scenario people imagine is, there's a lot of ethnic conflict in the world.
Yeah.
People could imagine a terrorist group wants to wipe out a certain specific ethnicity.
Yeah.
They design a genetically engineered bioweapon that is maybe just like coronavirus or something like that, but it only affects a particular subset of the population according to their genetic data. So what are you saying here about the trade-off between specificity and effectiveness?
Well, I mean, if you target particular genetic variants that are common, they're common
Right.
across the world.
Right, but okay, let's just say
the overlap is not perfect, so it's going to have disparate impact.
Right.
But it's going to cause a lot of collateral damage.
But let's say I'm a Hindu person. I'm just pulling these out of thin air,
sure.
of course. Let's say I'm a Hindu person and I hate like the Tartars or something like that, right? And I just want to kill all the Tartars in the world.
Yeah.
Couldn't you design a bioweapon that would only affect the Tartars, or no?
Probably not, but it could be non-trivially specific. I need to think about this now. You've actually made me start thinking about it. I don't know. I don't want people.
It's troubling.
I don't want people. Now I'm starting to stress out because we do have much better technology than we did 10 years ago. When I
think. My understanding is that this type of application is conceivable and increasingly so. And so, if you do have groups that want to do harm to other groups in a way that's genetically definable, it seems like a live wire.
Well, so this. Most of the listeners and viewers. You can do ancestry inference pretty well. The main issue, though, is, if you're looking at only a subset of the genome, there's going to be a lot of overlap, So if you want to precisely target a single human being, that seems like, that's why, I think I've heard the heads of state, all of their genetic material is always accounted for. Like, they're not going to throw a cup into the waste bin.
Is that right?
Yeah. Hillary was I remember in 2016, people were following Hillary around to make sure that she didn't leave like a tissue or anything like that. Because once you have their genetic material, you're a head of state. You could. It's not economically efficient for someone to develop a bioweapon to target you, because you're
Too
not
much
worth
work
that.
for
You're
one
not,
person.
Yeah, you're not worth that
much. You
much.
could just shoot someone.
Yeah. But if you're a head of state, if you're a billionaire, it might be worth it. And so, it's all about bang for the buck. As far as ethnically targeted bioweapons, there has been some research from what I've heard, rumors in certain countries. And the problem is usually the enemies are genetically kind of close to you because they're close to you. It's usually not Bolivians who want to target Chinese.
I see.
It's Bolivians that would want to target Peruvians. And guess what?
So the risks are much greater, and it becomes harder to inflict that kind of damage through a genetically biased.
The collateral damage, if you're willing to, you could probably, I don't know, I don't want to get in trouble with anyone, but,
No.
You could probably design, if you're a Bolivian scientist, you could design something that hits Peruvians harder, but it might take out 60% of your country too.
Right.
And so
It's like mutually assured destruction.
Yeah, it is. And so I think that's the fundamental problem. Now, if you want to attack the far enemy, I guess it would be more feasible. But again, humans do overlap a lot. So you need to be very careful how you design it.
Right.
Otherwise, it's going to start imagine you design a bioweapon and it kills like 10% of your enemy, and it kills 1% your own population. If you're a totalitarian country, maybe that's a trade-off you want to take. If you're a democratic population, no. Like if you're a Democrat, if they find out, they'll kill you.
Sure.
You know, like
Right.
they'll kill the developers.
But there are a lot of authoritarian countries out there.
Yeah, so I guess like let's worry about authoritarian countries. I need to think about it in more detail. I can't dismiss it out of hand.
Yeah.
It's just been, it's like artificial intelligence, like AGI, artificial general intelligence. It's been something that's always 10 years down the line.
Right.
And
Perpetually.
So, yeah, and I'm hoping that it'll be 10 years down the line.
I think it might also be similar in that I think there's a case to be made that, fortunately, the types of people who want to conduct systematic genocide campaigns are generally not the types of people who have the resources and the sophistication to organize very advanced scientific engineering.
Yeah, in
not
theory.
always the case, but there's something of a correlation there that might be the reason why we don't see that.
Yeah, well, I'm thinking here, you know, again, like we're coming back to the Fermi paradox. It's kind of dark.
Yeah, definitely.
Because like as we get more and more advanced, there is the capability of someone going full 12 monkeys on us.
Right. Yeah. Okay. Very dark. Let's change gears
I
a
don't
little
want.
bit.
Yeah, I don't want to think about this anymore.
So something else that you know a lot about and that you write a lot about is the Indian caste system. And I wanted to talk about this briefly because it's quite in vogue, I would say, to analyze American politics with a kind of pseudo
Sure.
caste lens.
Yeah,
And I just want to unpack a little bit how far you think that goes. Do you
I don't think it goes. Very
you don't
far.
think you get much analytical leverage?
Well,
out of,
I think the caste in America is a real thing, but it's totally different than the Indian caste.
okay, so break it down. What is caste in America?
Like caste in America is the fact that excuse me. Caste in America is the fact that I have a friend who is now a professor, tenured professor, and this person is a white American, and because and he's not a very politically radical person, but he believes in what I call the myth of white supremacy, that now that he's an upper middle class white American, he has all the privileges of every upper middle class white American, and I don't think that that's empirically true. He comes from his mom is a single mom. He comes from a lower middle class to lower class background. And I think that's going to affect his life going forward in ways he can't understand. It's going to affect his children in ways he can't understand. Like, they're not going to be able to get the same type of internships that his colleagues from a traditional upper middle class background are going to be able to get because they're not going to know the right people
Right.
over the summers.
Right.
They don't have a summer home somewhere else. He's going to have to build up that intergenerational wealth himself, you know?
Right. So what you're saying is that no matter how successful you are in America, there are still these hidden,
Yes,
invisible
it
contours.
still has an effect, and this is a noisy process.
Right.
I'm not saying that his children are automatically going to regress, but I've talked to multiple academics who buy this idea that because they're white, if they obtain enough material success, they're automatically accessing all the privileges of whiteness, and I just don't think that's true.
Okay. Right. And so, I mean, as a kid who comes from a working class family and made it pretty far up the ranks of social status, I definitely testify to that as well. I mean, it seems to me that there is a kind of mainline kind of white Protestant kind of Brahmin class, right? You probably say in the United States, is that how you would map it?
WASP, and you
yeah.
can tell when they talk.
Yeah.
They have a particular accent. Like, some people affect it, but I
Mhm.
have a friend, and she is a lawyer in New York City, and she sounds like a lawyer from New York City.
Right. And they have a way of knowing their own kind, and right. And so, okay, so that would roughly be the Brahmin class. And I mean, do you have a take on how the rest of the American caste system maps out? Like, how would you characterize it?
Well, I mean, there's the boat people, the MAGA boat people. They're like, working class or like associates, educated people that made it up a lot of money.
Yeah.
And so that's like a different caste where they're kind of showy, they're flashy, they don't have class, they have money. That's what you would say. And, these are the people that voted for Trump. These are the people, working class people that did well, but that are worried about immiseration because they see it around them. They see it in their families. They see it like in their communities, as opposed to the Brahmin class, which, I mean, I don't know if, I don't know too many people without college degrees.
Sure.
That's how I'll say it.
Mhm.
I'm not saying everyone I know is even middle class, although most of them are middle class and above. But I don't know the people I grew up with anymore. I grew up in Northeast Oregon, so it was kind of like diverse. in a class way. It was obviously all white, but it was very diverse in class. We had one high school in town,
Right.
And so I've self-segregated. You probably have too. We're in the same social
Sure, most
circles.
people do. Yeah.
Yeah. And how many working class people do you know personally anymore?
Sure.
Like, I don't know. I know like a couple.
So when you think about the woke phenomenon, do you think about this as a relatively epiphenomenal short-term thing, or do you think that it's going to be able to make inroads into the deep structure of the American caste system?
I don't think it's going to make a deep impact on the American caste system. But I don't think it's going to be short term. I think it's going to leave scars.
It does seem, though, to be a kind of war for the Brahmin position, doesn't it? In a way, I mean, there is this kind of new competitor. It's like a competitor priestly class, right?
It's a positional game. Like I think of wokeism as an instrument in positional games. Unlike classical economic Marxism and materialism, which is just about redistribution of concrete things, wokeism is the woke competition seems to be a mad scramble for status.
And it's specifically through that kind of priestly, moralistic pathway, right?
They believe in the power of words, the power of language, symbolic manipulation.
So it is, if you see it that way, then it is a bid for the Brahmin status in a way.
Well, I mean,
the question is like, can it succeed? I mean,
yeah, I mean, look, this is what I was saying yesterday to a friend of mine, a Republican friend of mine. This is what's going to happen in America. At the end of the day, everyone's going to kill everybody else. It's going to cancel out. There's going to be 2 people left standing. There's going to be a right-wing Republican Gujarati Patel, and there's going to be a SJW Gujarati Patel, because they're going to be like, everyone's assimilating into these 2 tribes.
Interesting. So that's your theory of the long run equilibrium.
I'm just joking. I mean, I'm kind of joking,
yeah.
But my point is, like, some of the wokest, most like vociferous SJW people are people that look like me, especially women, to be frank.
Mm-hmm.
But they're upper middle class.
Mm-hmm.
They're probably the children. They could be the children of doctors, engineers.
Right.
But they deploy their fact that they're brown, that they don't have white skin privilege. But this is BS.
Right, but the question is, will it work, or how much longer can it work? Is it a sustainable pathway to?
I don't think it is, because a lot of working class non-whites in particular are defecting because they're sick of it.
True.
I mean, how little do woke people respect Latinos that they actually just renamed them without consulting them?
Right.
That's like very insulting and offensive. Like, what if someone told Chinese people they just put an X at the end of their name,
right?
And like Chinese people are like, wait, we don't call ourselves this. Well, like we had a conference and we decided that this is more non-binary inclusive,
right?
It's like what the hell?
Okay, so you're bearish generally on the woke phenomenon. You think it doesn't have the longest legs, and it probably will kind of fizzle out on account of being unsustainable, kind of.
Yeah, I also like I don't know. I haven't talked about politics too much with you. I have some pretty reactionary cultural views. I think we're in the Kali Yuga. I think people are like inverting normality, and I don't think that that's sustainable. I think human nature is what it is, and it will ultimately come back to that, into some sort of stable state. There's only like certain ways you can organize society.
Right.
So let's say polyamory. Okay, we have mutual friends who are into that sort of stuff. This has been tried multiple times in United States history. It always peters out as a cultural phenomenon. I'm not saying that it goes extinct,
mm-hmm.
but as like a lifestyle choice and a cultural phenomenon, it always peters out, because guess what? Most people can't do this, And so this idea that everyone should experiment with their sexuality, no. I mean, I'm Gen X, so I can tell you, some people are born gay. They're born that way. And I think it was like kind of an injustice that when they were young, they were demanded to make sure that they were, like it wasn't natural for them.
Right.
That's not what they wanted to do. And so that's why we as a generation decided, they get to do their own thing. Like, let them be who they are.
Mm-hmm.
Now I feel the pendulum has swung in a weird way where a lot of people are like, well, you should like experiment with your gender identity and your sexuality. And I'm like, you should.
Yeah.
Don't talk to me.
Just wait until those people get CRISPR.
Yeah, which is true. And like that's at least like concrete.
Right.
Like if you want to be like a cat man, CRISPR that up.
Yeah.
You know, like
yeah.
more power to you. That's your choice. My only point is I think that people are trying to push a level of flexibility and openness on the typical American, typical human, where it's like, no, most of us are pretty much template people.
Right.
Like there's a template, you know, we age, we marry, we have children. You know, it's
Right.
like the Indian system. It's like you're a young man, you're a householder, and then you retire and you go into the forest to contemplate, stuff like that.
Absolutely. Yeah. So I want to close by talking a little bit about your Substack and your various projects. Your Substack is called Unsupervised Learning.
It is.
You also do a podcast.
Yes.
And I want to talk a little bit about how you're seeing the landscape for contemporary independent intellectuals such as yourself, because this is a kind of running theme on my podcast, something I talk a lot about and think a lot about. And I remember that you and I talked on the phone one time, probably more than a year ago.
It was September 2019.
Okay, so you remember the conversation I'm thinking of. And I remember you telling me how you were basically saying that you really wish you could do more independent intellectual work, but it's hard to make it feasible because, you know, you have a family and you have a job and all of that. And lo and behold, about a year later, you have a successful Substack. In other words, the landscape changes so rapidly.
Yeah,
and
that's
so
fair.
prospects for doing this kind of thing seem to be improving rapidly by the year. So I'm just curious, in light of that, how are you seeing the Substack phenomenon? Do you have any kind of interesting observations or testimonies to kind of the larger landscape? Anything you see that's interesting or want to share?
Yeah. So I think I can share the fact that Substack itself, they are having issues scaling because so many people joined.
Right.
You know, like Sullivan joined over the summer.
Are you Substack Pro? Are you in that group?
No, I'm not.
Okay.
Yeah, don't criticize me because I took less
You're
than
not.
I should.
You're not on the secret payroll. Okay.
No, I'm not. I just like joined because
Sure.
you know, I saw Matt Iglesias joined and he was doing well, and I'm like, well, Matt Iglesias is doing well. I should be doing well because, you know, I think I'm a little bit more of a unique product. You know,
Nice.
I don't have the quantity.
Nice. Dropping some bows on him.
No, I don't have the quantity that
No,
he's
it's good
got.
for the views, man. This is
But-
good.
but
Make
he's-
some more beefs with other people. This
No,
is
he's
great.
got I got quality though. You know, like, where are you gonna read about the step and, you know, all the latest on like the science stuff? It's like,
Yeah,
that's
you go
my-
deep. You go real deep.
That's my Substack, right?
It's not just like political takes and corny kind of superficial stuff. You go deep.
Yeah, and like political takes and corny superficial stuff. I mean, I subscribe to Iglesias' Substack, so whatever. Like I enjoy it. I don't read all of it because it's like every day, dude. You know, like my stuff, like it's less frequent. I do the podcast at least once a week, but the other stuff, the written stuff, like when it's like a 5,000 or 6,000 word essay, or like my step pieces where it's like I've done 1, 2, 3 of those, and each one is 5,000 to 6,000 words, and they're highly edited and all that stuff. And I even like I did some India pieces in January, where I commissioned some visuals. You know, so I'm putting some effort. It's
Yeah.
more than a blog post, and you know,
Definitely.
check it out. But it's been going well. I've been getting a lot of good feedback. But text, I'm mostly gating, because I basically feel at this point, I want people to pay for this because I'm going to put a lot of effort into it, and there's going to be people out there who want to read this. And if you're not willing to pony up, that's fine.
Yeah.
I don't care.
So so this is interesting. So you're kind of more on the side of paywalling more rather than less.
Yeah, and
Okay.
I know that there is a philosophy.
Well,
of,
just
like,
debates about what's optimal. So I'm curious
Yeah.
about your perspective.
well, I mean,
on
I've
that.
done okay. I'm not gonna tell you how well, but like you can go and look.
Give us a range.
I mean, I have like 1,000 paid subscribers in that range,
Okay, right.
in
on.
that order.
Yeah.
Okay, like I can say that because you can tell if you go look.
Right.
You know, so, and those people, they get the text. Now, could I release the text? Some of it I could at some point, but ultimately, I don't think most people really want to read 5,000 to 6,000 words. They want to like get a click, a paragraph, a headline,
Right.
and they can get that. Podcasts, I feel I always release everything free after 2 weeks. Sometimes I just release it free immediately. But my podcasts aren't like news of the day, so usually they're pretty evergreen.
Yeah.
And I record it and I release it, and then I do it 2 weeks later. I do it free because I just feel like that's a more casual thing. And there's a lot of people out there who want to listen and learn, but they don't necessarily want to pay. But if you're going to pay for like a 6,000, I mean, if you want to read a 6,000 word essay that I spent a week revising over and over again and trying to like pick just the right word to communicate to the public in a precise way that doesn't diminish the accuracy of the underlying science, then you should do that. You
Sure.
know, I'm not just going to throw that out there anymore,
Sure.
which I have in the past.
And are you seeing consistent growth in the subscriber count? Like every week, every month?
Pretty consistent. I've seen pretty. I mean, basically, whenever I release a text piece, I will. I think I can say this without Whenever I release like a big piece of text, I get a lot of subscribers. Like people are really driven by the text. Now,
because people are sharing it with their friends.
Yeah, and also, I guess if I get like high profile guests, sometimes like I had Greg Clark on. David Anthony is an Indo-Europeanist. Like a lot of people subscribe. Sometimes, I like to have my podcast be a mix of like high profile and just people I find interesting. I think it needs a diverse portfolio, and that's what I try to do with the podcast. With the text, I do let the readers who are paying guide me a bit in terms of like, what are you interested in? I did a 2-part series on the Romani, on the Gypsies of Europe at the end of May, and that was kind of like, it was something people had asked about before. And so I took a break from the steppe and I did that. And now I'm doing a 5-part series. I did the first 3 already on Finns. I have 2 of them drafted and I'm editing. Those will be released this week. And then I'm releasing a piece on the relevance of plague to the arrival of the Indo-Europeans and the collapse of the Neolithic civilizations. And so I'm continuing the steppe. Indo-Europeans are going to be my next 3 to 5 pieces.
Right on.
And then I move later in time.
And so do you have any read on where you think this whole creator economy is going? Now that you're kind of in the thick of it and you have a successful project, like, do you see yourself in 5 years? Are you building a whole company around this? Or how do you see the future?
I don't see myself building a whole company. I have like another, I have other stuff that I'm doing related to being a scientist. And I don't talk about that in public because I already have too high of a profile for people who fund things. Let's just put it that way. Mm-hmm. I'm too much of a lightning rod. So I'm still doing that. Like, look, if I could make enough from the Substack to have a comfortable upper middle class lifestyle, I can imagine myself doing that. Although the only thing that I worry about is, being a working scientist gives me kind of like my hands are kind of in the guts of it.
Yeah.
You have a feel. I'm talking to you about like technologies. Like, would I know that if I didn't do the science anymore, like 5 years from now?
Right.
So that does always worry me. I like to do multiple things. I mean, you're the same. I think we code, we do podcasts, we write.
But I know what you're talking about because I did kind of take the plunge away from the career to do all this stuff full time, and I think you're right. I think you do lose contact with something that is important, and you have to come up with other ways of maintaining that contact. So I think that's a correct perception. So you feel like you actually kind of prefer having a job in the weeds as well as doing the Substack.
It's hard though. It's hard to balance the focus, the trade-off in time and everything like that.
And is your audience, are the paying subscribers, do you get the sense it's a very sophisticated crowd? It's mostly professionals, mostly, what do you think?
But I'm surprised there's retired people without college degrees, plumber. I get a fair number, because it's a newsletter, even though it's on the web as well. I get a fair number of emails, and it's, they're just like, a lot of them are super appreciative, especially the retirees. They can tell that I put the time into it.
Yeah.
And, they're basically like, I can't find this elsewhere. This is why they're paying. Like, I mean, so in terms of the economics, like, I don't know how that's going to work. Mm-hmm. Like, I pay for like a bunch of Substacks myself, but, so people are like, like right now my yearly is $75. Okay. Like, you could get like 3 hardcover books or something for that, Mm-hmm. But how do I justify that? I think some people just want to support me because I've been doing this for a long time without being paid. But if you read a book, you're committing to like one topic, right? Whereas like I'm producing like a diverse range of essays. There are people who read like the Finnish genetics one, but they're not going to read the Romani genetics one, and vice versa. So I think like I do add value for that subscription. And like if you think of it like a book, because like you've read my stuff. It's not like a reported piece in the New York Times, mm-hmm. which like, I still subscribe to the New York Times, but like, it's not like I'm calling some people up and reporting what they say and just like slapping on a general thesis.
Sure. The reason I ask about these things is because since I quit academia to do all this stuff full time, I've kind of become a lightning rod for people who are interested in doing this kind of thing,
sure.
Specifically for the more academic types, the more sophisticated types, people working in fairly arcane and erudite domains. The challenge that a lot of people face is they feel like this is so specialized, it's so specific, it's so narrow and so advanced. Like, how do I actually get an audience for this kind of thing? And so I think you're an interesting case that you might be able to share some interesting insights
sure.
with my audience, specifically to this effect. I mean, what one thing you just alluded to, actually, which I think is important, is that you were blogging for ages for free, right?
Yeah.
Many years, like more than 10 years. How long were you actively blogging?
I started blogging in the spring of 2002.
Yeah.
Were you in elementary school?
So you're OG in 2002. No, not elementary school.
Yeah.
So yeah, so that's part of the ingredient here, right?
I have an audience.
yeah.
There are people who started reading me in high school who are now, old.
Right. So that's part of the lesson, right? Blog for a long time, put in the work for a long time.
Well, develop a brand.
Right.
That
Sure.
helps. So, I mean, I developed a brand. I had a brand. I had people who signed up immediately. I had a small MailChimp mailing list already. I can tell you that my free mailing list, though, has gone up by a 6.5x since I started last year. So I had a brand. Okay, that's fine. But there are people who have brands who get some free people, and then they can't make themselves right. They whatever. I'm not going to name names, but there are people like that.
Wait, what do you mean by that?
Well, it's like they start a Substack, and they're like, this is what the Substack's going to be about, and a bunch of people prepay. And
Right.
they never post.
Oh, right.
Which has happened to people.
Sure.
Because like they mean to, but they can't follow through.
Just an execution problem or a discipline problem.
Or they didn't anticipate like how much time they
Yeah.
wouldn't have.
Right.
And so, I've continued to produce content. That's obviously good. When I produce content, I have 38,000 Twitter followers.
Mhm.
And so I tweet it out.
And is that all the marketing you do? Just share it in
It's
a
not
tweet?
the only I mean, I don't do paid marketing, but I do go on shows like yours.
Right.
I go on a show, The Study of Antiquity and History, with my friend Nick. And so he does, basically, like my audience is kind of like me.
Mhm.
They're probably Gen X professionals.
Okay.
Okay.
Makes
But I want to get I would love like someone who just graduated college and has some disposable income to like subscribe for $8 a month. Okay.
Right.
And because like I know maybe they don't want to be subscribed for $75, but check it out for $8 a month. And there are people who subscribe and unsubscribe multiple times. Probably shouldn't say that, but
Well, makes sense, right? Sometimes they
it's
have
rational.
the money. Yeah. Sometimes
But
they
I
don't.
mean, in any case, so I want to get out there to the Zoomers. So that's why I do YouTube with Nick. That's why I'm doing this with you. I mean, I don't know what you're.
Yeah, Zoomer millennial.
Yeah, there's
it's like in all things, the audience is like you, basically, with some
yeah.
distribution, of course.
Yeah.
So I'm your pathway to the millennials.
Yeah. And so then I go on Nick's show. Sometimes I go on. I don't think I get too many subscriptions because of just financial issues, but I go on Indian shows.
Yeah.
Because I'm big in India.
Yeah, Substack needs to introduce
Like gamers.
parody, purchase
Exactly.
parody, right?
Exactly. So
Yeah.
I do forward my pieces to Indians who ask repeatedly, because they can't afford it.
Sure.
So whatever.
Right.
Um,
Okay, so you just basically go on podcasts and YouTube when you're invited on things, and then you just, when you publish a new edition, you just share the link to Twitter.
yes.
Do you do like systematic things where you'll like share it 5 times that week, or you'll share clips or quotes or like anything systematic?
I have started to do the clips and the quotes, not clips. I don't.
Like
I don't.
quotes,
I
like
don't promote my podcast
Mhm.
too much. I let that go organic. But when it comes to my pieces, I do promote them pretty heavily. I'll pin them. I'll do like a screenshot. I've started doing that.
Yep.
And so today, so I put out something free last week. So I put out a mix of free and paid stuff.
Mhm.
I put out something free about recent human evolution, fossils discovered, and I tweeted out like crazy. And then I tweeted out again this morning. And it's not quite my number one piece is called having like an IQ about IQ. It's about intelligence.
Okay.
That one has like a long tail. Like people keep rereading it, and I can see who's reading it. They go back. They bookmarked it. But this one is like my number 2 piece now, and it's free, and I promoted it. It got extensively retweeted, and I did that again. I don't use Facebook too much. I know there are some Facebook shares, but I think Facebook's more for boomers.
Yeah, Facebook sucks.
Yeah, I mean it's a boomer platform, and boomers who are interested in my stuff, they subscribe to the newsletter. And they
Yeah.
get the email.
Right.
That's how they do it.
So Substack shows you which of your subscribers look at which piece and when, like how many times.
I shouldn't have said that.
Well, I mean, I could just make an account and find out, but I didn't know that.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, everyone has access.
I can see like all sorts of. Like,
That's pretty
Have you
informative,
opened it? When did you open it? Did you use the web?
Yeah.
And so there.
That's interesting.
I mean, there was somebody who said. One thing is, so I will tell you this. My stuff is mostly gated. That's text. I have seen and heard people on podcasts and also on Twitter say things that are clearly from what I wrote.
Yeah.
But since it's not public, how would people know? It's fine. I don't actually mind that.
Right.
Like they're paying for it.
Dude, I've been noticing this this has become, for some reason, very salient in my mind recently, how much people like to steal ideas without citing people.
Yeah.
It's happened to me a couple times. I've been listening to podcasts where I've heard someone kind of steal almost language out of my mouth.
Yes.
And it's like, dude, it's not that hard to just throw me a bone. Say my name. Say you got that from Justin Murphy. Like, it would make me feel so good. I'd really appreciate it, you know? Like, why not? But there's a really bad habit nowadays. It's like, I mean, you come up through academia, so you know with me, like, it's just what you do. Like, if you get something interesting or valuable from someone else, you just cite them. It's just there's no downside.
Yeah.
It actually makes you seem generous and erudite.
Yeah.
That you can cite other people's names, you can share where you got it from. Is often it's a plus, right? Because you're giving more information to your audience, you're sending them to valuable resources, and you're being a good person, and you're showing off your erudition. It's a win-win for everyone. And I'm stunned recently. It's become like so obvious to me how often people do this on the internet, on Twitter, on podcasts. People don't like to just give people the favorable mention, even though you're using their ideas. Why do you think people don't do that?
I think some of them didn't come through academia, where the citation is almost second nature.
So they think they're like getting one over, you know.
You know, it's like people who are like telling a story where it's someone else's story, but they just repurpose it. You know, so I think that's part of it. So sometimes it's laziness, and also like they want to seem. So I don't know about you. I've never plagiarized.
No.
But
this might be an academic thing. Like, we would never.
There
right?
are people who habitually do it in the media.
Oh, in writing too, you mean?
They just get caught. And it's just like, and like, I've been writing for 19 years now.
Right.
I can tell you for a fact, I have never plagiarized.
Of course.
You know?
I mean, I think that's another one of the positive externalities of the academic culture is like, just never. You would never, ever.
Yeah. So I don't know. It's just, I don't have that reflex. I don't think we have the reflex, whatever
I guess
it
that's
is.
true. I guess that basically is the answer, that if you don't come up through academia, you're naturally more liberal about that kind of thing. And I mean, to be fair, you know, there's a lot of these ideas and norms out there. Great artists steal. People like to say this kind of thing. And it is true. I mean, we do live in this kind of crazy cosmopolitan world of freely floating information, and it is to a degree it's fair, but I think my little like value add here is just like, I want to communicate to people how it's win-win for everyone, including you. Like, you actually come off better, you show off how much you've read, and you build relationships by citing people. And what a lot of people don't realize is that actually that web of citations is actually how influence works, in a way that benefits the citer as much as the cited. And so it's like, if we have this culture where no one wants to just give credit to other people where they picked up a good idea from, the actual result is it's kind of a race to the bottom. It's like no one is able to build a web.
No, it's a tragedy of the commons.
Yeah, no one's able to build a web of influence because no one's willing to give it to the others. And so it's actually shooting yourself in the foot in a way, because that means everyone's atomized, floating on these different chaotic islands. And I actually think, one longer term thesis would be that this is one of my great interests at the moment, is just thinking about what the future of the intellectual life looks like, given this kind of just digital chaos of everything being reshuffled and power structures of intellectual influence being totally revolutionized as we speak. Like, how does that shake out in the long run? And I think one interesting hypothesis is that what actually maintains long-term influence is going to be those individuals and groups that are actually able to reconstitute webs of citation, more or less. Yeah. Because that is ultimately the structure or the foundation upon which like future generations look to see what is worthy of attention. Yeah. And so in a way, if you don't participate in some kind of web like that, you might be exiting the meme pool sooner than you think. Is my take.
So I'll give you one story. I think journalists, I don't know why, but I think journalists do this a lot more than academics. I have a friend, we're still friends. I don't have a problem with this, but he asked me many years ago, was over 10 years ago, what do you think would be a good idea for a column? And so I sent him a paragraph, and he just used it. I just read it. I was like, whoa. Yeah. It's fine. And I know other people do that too. They just ask people, what do you think would be a good idea for you? And then they just use it.
Right.
And I'm like, that's weird. I think that's weird.
Right.
It's common in journalism.
It's one thing to take idea, like the idea, but not the text. Right. Like,
yeah. Well, I mean, I think he changed some of it, but the structure was my paragraph in terms of it. It was basically.
Right.
And so.
But you do ask friends for their input, and then you'll like leverage it, right?
Yeah.
Like, I called you up when I was doing the arranged marriage agency that we started. Yeah. I just called you up and I was like, hey, just what do you, in your view, what are the major predictors, you know?
Yeah.
And like I used that, I asked a few other people, and I synthesized that. Maybe I didn't like cite your name somewhere,
No,
but there was
that's
nothing
fine.
specific to cite. No, to me that's like fair play.
Yeah.
The not fair play is like lifting actual words.
Yeah.
Basically.
Well, I did joke that of course, like it would be like a white guy who culturally appropriates our culture, tries to monetize it.
Oh yeah, that's true. Yeah, we'll see if it's possible to recreate that in the Western world, but I'm still optimistic. I think we'll get one sometime.
Well, with the way the dating scene is today,
Yeah,
that's fundamentally what's the competition? It's not looking great in terms of like their
Bad
so
out
it's
there.
like this is the value proposition here.
yeah. Well, we'll see what comes of that, but I shouldn't be plugging my own work on this podcast, which is all about you, Razib. Thank you for this. This is awesome, man. We covered
Yeah.
a lot of ground. This is fire.
Well, I'll see you around, bro.
Yeah, dude. Thanks for coming on. Appreciate it.
Hey, thank you so much for listening to the podcast. You made it all the way to the very end, so you must really like the show. In that case, I would be super grateful if you'd be so kind to leave a review on Apple Podcasts. All you have to do is go to otherlife.co/review. That's otherlife.co/review. And it'll send you to Apple Podcasts. Just leave a review. You can be honest. Tell me what you really think. I'd really appreciate it because it'll help other people find the show, and I'm really trying to grow out the podcast. So thanks for listening, and thank you for leaving a review. I really appreciate it.